get to Tim Walz, who, just when you think no one's sitting at this table, neither she nor the big white blanket, can embarrass themselves any further, he does. She asks him, to her credit, about the carrying the weapons in war, which we know is a lie. He never served in war. He's been stealing valor for quite some time.
Our strength is our diversity. We've been talking about this for years as a country of immigrants, and we let them define the issue on immigration. We let them define the issue on DEI, and we let them define what woke is. We got ourselves in this mess because we weren't bold enough to stand up and say, "You damn right we're proud of these policies. We're going to put them in, and we're going to execute them."
So, wait, you lost because you weren't woke enough?
Greg Gutfeld and Megyn Kelly go all out on Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Mixing Gutfeld's sharp sarcasm with Kelly's precise, cutting observations, they leave no mistake unchecked. Their relentless roast highlights a trail of confusion, missteps, and cringe-worthy moments under Walz's leadership. From botched policies to over-the-top press conferences, nothing escapes their scrutiny. This isn't just critique, it's a full-on takedown. Any hope Walz had of bouncing back politically gets hit hard as their scathing commentary spares nothing.
You said you carried weapons in war, but you've never deployed in a war zone. A campaign official of yours said you misspoke. Did you? Well, I'm proud, incredibly proud of my record. He keeps doing this. Equally proud of my service in the classroom. Did I mention I was a teacher and a coach, an assistant coach? Okay, whatever. But he's more stolen valor. In the classroom, I'm in the classroom. My record speaks for itself. It doesn't, actually. You've put a lot of lies into that record that you've been called out on by service personnel. You must clarify, as your campaign had tried to do, and now you appear to be distancing yourself from that.
Greg Gutfeld was already grinning, and that grin always meant trouble. This time, his target was Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, a man so committed to blandness he could make beige wallpaper look daring. With his wit sharpened like a blade, Gutfeld was ready to turn Walz into his next punchline.
Here's, two pieces of this that are really... I speak like they do. People are coming to get to know me. I speak like they do. I speak candidly. I wear my emotions on my sleeves, and I speak especially passionately about, and then he goes on to blame it on the school shootings. I guess he was upset about school shootings, so he lied. But stop saying you speak like we do. I speak like regular people. What kind of bullshit is...
Greg leaned back like a man ready to feast on political absurdity. Reaching for his favorite tool, sarcasm, he sized up Walz. This wasn't just a governor. He was a full-time bureaucrat, part-time logic dodger, and an up-and-coming master of public confusion. His idea of strong leadership: issue a press release, cancel it, and then blame the media for reading it.
Walz also seemed to doubt the validity of the last election and future ones.
They've released analyses of election data out of Clark County, Nevada, that show some pretty convincing evidence of election tampering. So what can we do to make sure, A, that the midterms actually happen, and B, that they're free of fraud?
Yeah, this one's a clue. We saw just recently Donald Trump's executive order to make it more difficult, specifically to women, trying to make it more difficult for women to be able to vote. We see one of the first things they do is try and restrict the vote.
Wait, so Trump is making it more difficult for women to...
Greg didn't need a crystal ball to guess Tim's next move. Just a basic understanding of dodging responsibility while grinning like he'd solved world hunger. If political cowardice had a spokesperson, Walz would be front and center, holding a gift bag, asking for a raise and acting like he just saved democracy.
Pouring of love for his son and the relationship between a father and son in that moment was overwhelming too. Yes, even among Republicans. But he wants to dodge the responsibility for his lies, and he brings up his son to do it. He tried...
Greg's mind replayed the highlights, like when Tim laid out his economic plan and somehow described a low-budget disaster movie. Inflation? Not his fault. Job losses? Cosmic mystery. Small businesses disappearing faster than Halloween stores in November? Pure coincidence. In Tim's world, accountability was fiction, and he wasn't even pretending to write believable script.
I love this. Tampon King gets back in the ring. I speak of former VP nominee Tim Walz. He joined Beto O'Rourke at a Texas town hall last night, and the estrogen levels were enough to give Chuck Norris menstrual cramp.
And Tim Walz really did indeed look like the bumbling knucklehead he said he was.
Greg laughed. Watching Walz handle a crisis was like watching someone juggle flaming chainsaws blindfolded in a wind tunnel, except the wind tunnel was his own administration. Somehow, the chaos didn't just follow Walz, it performed under his direction. If government dysfunction had a Spotify playlist, his press conferences would top the charts. Then there were the lockdown flip-flops. One week, trust the science. The next, go with your gut. A COVID surge hits, and suddenly Walz is back on camera with that signature expression, the kind you see on someone who wandered into the wrong wedding, but decided to give a toast anyway. Greg marveled at Walz's talent for saying nothing at length. Every press conference felt like performance art, answering questions nobody asked while tiptoeing around the ones that mattered. He didn't pivot, he pirouetted, with all the grace of a moose on roller skates. And the slogans? Don't get Greg started. Walz's speeches sounded like they were ghostwritten by a motivational cat calendar. Fluff on the surface, no substance underneath. Inspiring until you realized you were applauding a man who blamed potholes on climate change and grocery prices on vibes.
You're exactly right in the dynamic. You could tell Walz was unsteady on his feet. Here is part of his very first answer. They kicked off the debate by going to him, and the question was basically as follows: Iran launched its largest attack yet on Israel, blah, blah, blah. Would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? And here's Tim Walz.
Governor Walz, if you were the final voice in the Situation Room, would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. And thank you for those joining at home tonight. Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners. Israel's ability to be able to defend itself.
Greg figured that if Tim Walz ever wrote a memoir, it would be called Leadership in Reverse: How to Walk Back Every Decision Without Looking Like You're Running. Each chapter would be a masterclass in public evasion, ending with a heartfelt apology addressed to absolutely no one. The real punchline, Greg noted, was that Walz kept getting reelected. He chalked it up to Minnesotans being either deeply forgiving or just too polite to admit they accidentally voted for a leader whose style resembled a substitute teacher who forgot the lesson plan. Greg wasn't alone in the roast. Enter Megyn Kelly, stepping into the rhetorical ring with the calm precision of a surgeon wielding a verbal scalpel, while Greg played the Joker with a flamethrower. Megyn was the prosecutor, laying out a case so airtight it made Walz look like a guilty contestant on a rigged game show. She wasn't there to entertain, she was there to expose. She started, fittingly, with education. Walz, once a teacher himself, had somehow overseen one of the most chaotic educational roller coasters in the country. Schools opened, then closed. Curricula changed mid-year. Parents were left furious and confused. It was as if education policy under Walz had been created by throwing darts blindfolded at a chalkboard full of bad ideas. Megyn didn't just criticize. She revealed a leadership record that made even a napkin doodle during a panic attack look more coherent than Walz's actual agenda.
I guess hating himself is the first thing he's nailed correctly. Because Walz saying old white men suck isn't a political stance, it's his confession. Walz calling people old and white is like Maxine Waters making fun of someone for shopping at Wigs R Us. He wants to execute more DEI policies, and Trump wants to execute murderous gang members. So there you go.
And when parents dared to ask for clarity, they got lectures instead. Walz treated parental concern like it was contagious, something to downplay, contain, and ultimately blame on misinformation. Megyn Kelly raised an eyebrow and quipped, "If parental engagement is dangerous, then Tim must think bedtime stories are acts of rebellion." Then came the riots, the moment when true leadership was needed most. Tim Walz pulled a disappearing act. Megyn pointed out that his idea of crisis management in Minneapolis was to stand behind a podium, deliver a barely coherent statement, and vanish like a magician who lost the instruction manual. The National Guard didn't arrive late because they were unprepared. It was because the governor was busy calibrating his political optics. God forbid he act before checking Twitter's wind direction. And it wasn't just buildings that were burning. Megyn said it was credibility. She described Walz as having a special talent, presenting himself as calm in the storm, while quietly being the guy who forgot to board up the windows. His passive leadership was so refined, she joked. It belongs in a museum, right next to a plaque reading, "Warning, may cause confusion and economic decay." Then she turned to his COVID record. Not just the restrictions, but the wild inconsistency, the selective enforcement and arbitrary exemptions. Under Walz's guidance, Megyn noted, a barbershop was a public health hazard, but a packed political rally, simply democracy in action. If logic were currency, she said, his administration would be completely bankrupt.
You said that you carried weapons in war, but you have never deployed actually in a war zone. A campaign official said that you misspoke. Did you?
Well, first of all, I'm incredibly proud. I've done 24 years of wearing the uniform of this country. Equally proud of my service in a public school classroom, whether it's Congress or the governor. My record speaks for itself, but I think people are coming to get to know me. I speak like they do. I speak candidly. I wear my emotions on my sleeves, and I speak especially passionately about...
She laid it out plainly. Tim Walz didn't lead, he performed. He issued mandates like a game show host spinning a wheel, hoping the outcome would be trendy enough to stick. But leadership isn't about chasing trends, it's about making decisions. And Walz treated decisions like hot potatoes, tossed them, blamed the heat, and hoped someone else caught the fallout. Megyn wasn't done. She turned to the economy, showing how small businesses across Minnesota bore the brunt of Walz's selective shutdowns while big box chains stayed open and thrived. It was a rigged game, and Walz was the dealer pretending he hadn't stacked the deck. Greg jumped back in, tag-teaming the takedown by spotlighting Walz's obsession with optics. The governor, he claimed, believed that if he smiled wide enough, no one would notice the broken policies piling up behind him. His social media team worked harder than his policy advisors. Every tweet was polished. Every photo is perfectly curated. If hashtags and filters could fix failing infrastructure, economic damage, and public frustration, Minnesota would have been golden.
With Walz, it's hard to even bring him up. He has a resting snitch face, you know? I mean, he forfeited his man card during COVID and the riots. And you're right. And also, at that diner, of course, he left early. So don't you find it weird that for a terrified Politico lingers on candidates' fingers and defend Walz's wide eyes as they claim beards are for bad?
Greg joked that Walz probably had a war room where aides spent hours debating the perfect camera angle for his next announcement, only to forget what the announcement was actually about. It was performance over policy, theater over truth, and leadership by illusion. If Walz had captained the Titanic, Greg said, he'd have held a press conference to discuss the iceberg's tone, then tweeted about hope, unity, and ice diversity while the ship sank. Megyn, ever composed, delivered the final blow. She pointed out that Walz had perfected the art of accountability without consequences. Trust eroded, yet he kept talking, spinning narratives, issuing statements, and performing like the show must go on. Tim Walz isn't a leader, she said. He's a placeholder. A man who fills space, makes noise, and hopes the applause drowns out the damage. A governor who governs with mirrors, smoke, and just enough charm to confuse the audience. Greg, never one to end quietly, added, as long as Walz keeps pretending to lead, we'll keep the spotlight on him, because comedy doesn't write itself. But with Tim Walz in office, Greg noted wryly, it pretty much does.
Well, what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter.
4 fundamentals and 2 confusing saying Israel when you meant Iran. Not ideal. May I remind you of Donald Trump's first tweet when she chose him? Thank you. That was just... I mean, he did seem unsteady. And that's the thing, because one of the goals when you get out there, Camille, is to try to project, don't worry, if anything happens at the top, I can do this job. And at no point last night did Tim Walz.
And just like that, the roast kept sizzling, because with Tim Walz still at the helm, the material was endless. Greg couldn't resist diving back in. He leaned forward like a cat spotting a slow-moving laser dot and zeroed in on Walz's latest brainchild, his climate agenda. Environmental stewardship? Noble, Greg admitted. But in Walz's hands, it looked more like a Pinterest board than serious policy. There were solar panels slapped onto failing school roofs, electric buses breaking down more often than his talking points, and bike lanes winding through neighborhoods where no one even rides bikes. Greg joked Walz was trying to turn Minnesota into a Scandinavian utopia, minus the functioning government and reliable transportation. Then came the cherry on top, Walz's grand plan to reduce emissions by encouraging residents to mow less. Yes, the lawn revolution. Greg laughed so hard he nearly toppled his chair. Somewhere in a policy bunker, a team of clipboard warriors genuinely believed skipping yard work was the key to saving the planet. Meanwhile, Minnesotans stared at their overgrown lawns, wondering if their weeds qualified for tax credits.
The idea that you said that you were in war. Did you misspeak as the campaign has said?
Yeah, I said we were talking about, in this case, this was after a school shooting, the ideas of carrying these weapons of war. And my wife, the English teacher, told me my grammar's not always correct. But again, if it's not this, it's an attack on my children for showing love for me, or it's an attack on my dog.
This took Hudson.
Megyn picked up the baton without missing a beat, zeroing in on Walz's obsession with surveys and task forces. Every problem sparked a new panel, commission, or group of suited experts sitting around with no real solutions. It was governance by groupthink. Megyn said Walz loved consensus because it gave him cover to avoid taking a real stand. Why risk a position when you can form a committee to pass the blame? Later, she pointed out how Minnesota's crime rates quietly rose while Walz was busy brainstorming slogans and watching polls. Instead of tackling root causes or clearly supporting law enforcement, Walz practiced political yoga, twisting himself into positions that wouldn't upset his base. Megyn called it spineless ambition and meant every word. Greg nodded in agreement, reminding everyone that Walz built his career sounding sensible while doing the exact opposite. He said Walz's legacy wouldn't be progress or change, it would be prolonged confusion wrapped in feel-good press releases.